Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Global Project Oasis launch. I think everyone who is here in Buenos Aires with us, but especially everyone who is following us through the streaming on YouTube. And I just want to invite Arume Kantaraman, who is the Global Research and Insights Lead at Google News Programs, who will introduce the relevant topic we are discussing today.
Thank you, Ana Paula. Buenos dias, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for all of you for being here in person with us. Thank you to everyone who's watching the live stream. It is such a pleasure to kick off this next phase of the Project Oasis journey. This is a journey that began in 2020. We had an opportunity to first start off by mapping independent digital news organizations with Lion, the UNC School of Journalism, and Douglas Smith. 2 years ago, we were very excited to have SembraMedia come on board and spearhead our effort to expand Project Oasis to Europe with the support of regional partners like the EJC. And now we're even more excited to bring Project Oasis to Latin America, in Spanish Latin America, and with the help of our regional partner, AJOR, to Brazil. Later on this year, we'll be expanding to Africa and Asia. This journey has been possible due to the tireless work of the SembraMedia team this past couple of years, and it's one of the reasons I'm so thrilled we're able to host the global launch of this effort, of the directory, of the research, here from the Global South in Buenos Aires. So thank you all for being here. I think a round of applause for the SembraMedia team and for yourselves as we embark on this next phase. As Ana Paula mentioned, my name is Arun Venkataraman. I am the Global Research and Insights Lead for Google News Programs. I've been at Google for 10 years and worked with the news ecosystem for the last 8 years. This is an impossibly young photo of me. Believe it or not, this was my first day at Google. It's a cautionary tale on what 10 years can do to you. But in that capacity, I've had the opportunity to work very closely with a number of institutions across the world on topics central to a healthy news information ecosystem. Some of these efforts you may be familiar with. We've been the primary sponsors of the Reuters Digital News Report. We launched just a couple of months ago the 2024 version of that report. The News Sustainability Project, the Next Generation News Report, which we launched with FT Strategies and the Medill School of Journalism earlier this year. And then, of course, Project Oasis. And that work is motivated by three central questions that we are looking to explore alongside the ecosystem. The first question is news consumption behaviors and preferences. What do they look like right now? How are they evolving? And perhaps most importantly, what does that mean for the traditional news value proposition as we understand it? The second question is trying to understand what the ecosystem looks like right now. What are the drivers of sustainability? What are emerging models of publishers? What are emerging models of success? And then finally, we work with the ecosystem to understand the role that technology can play to help news organizations better serve the needs of the communities that they work with. Now, Project Oasis is an effort that we use to really understand that second category, to really understand this emerging sector of independent digital native news organizations doing incredible, thoughtful journalism, serving the communities that they're in. But I think to really understand the importance of these editorially independent digital native news organizations, we have to think about that first category, news consumer behaviors and preferences, because that's what many of these digital native news organizations are responding to. And so to contextualize the rich insights we're going to hear over the course of the next hour, I wanted to share some findings from the Reuters Digital News Report that I think helps illustrate the moment we're in currently. What do news consumer behaviors and preferences look like? And most importantly, how are they changing? Because they are changing in drastic ways that is going to have implications for any of us who are interested in helping enable and build a more informed world. In the moment that we're in, we have seen that social media has now surpassed search and direct traffic as the main way to get to the news. In the moment that we're in, we see that news consumers, particularly younger news consumers, are increasingly turning to personalities and creators and influencers for the news, oftentimes because they've built a relationship, even though many of these creators and influencers don't have an expertise in the news. In the moment that we're in, a majority of consumers, particularly young consumers, and particularly those in the global south, a majority of them consume news on video every week, and that's across short form, long form, and live stream. So the video moment that has often been talked about, it's finally here. In the moment that we're in, yes, consumers still want news that helps keep them up to date. They want news that provides them context around events and topics. They want news that provides them different perspectives so they can make sense of the world around them. But they increasingly, especially young consumers, are looking to the news to inspire them, to make them feel connected to others. In the moment that we're in, younger news consumers want and are interested in different topics than older news consumers. On this slide, you'll see, for example, that while older news consumers are interested in politics, especially national politics, younger news consumers are interested in science and technology, social justice, climate change, a different set of issues than perhaps what legacy news organizations have traditionally provided. In the moment that we're in, unfortunately, there has been a steady decline in news across a number of markets. And there has been an increase in selective news avoidance, which continues to grow and has grown just over the course of the last 5 years, particularly for those under the age of 35. However, we also know that when we ask these individuals who are selectively avoiding the news, what would get them to engage with the news again? They tell us positive journalism, solution-oriented journalism, explanatory journalism. The reason I think all of this matters is because we all recognize we're an increasingly noisy information ecosystem. And the moment that we're in, a majority of consumers everywhere want content that they can trust, are concerned about distinguishing what is true from what is false online. And all of this matters because digital native news organizations, including the ones we're going to talk about today, the ones you'll find in the directory that Janine will talk about shortly, the ones you can read about in the report, they are emerging to meet the moment that we're in. They're emerging to provide content on topics consumers are interested in a format that meets them where they are, in a tone and language that is accessible, in a way that is actionable and useful. And I think that's why this sector of our ecosystem is so important for all of us to not only identify, but to understand more deeply and think about what we collectively, as stakeholders in a more informed world, can collectively do together to empower. And so one of the reasons I am so excited to introduce Janine Warner, the executive director of SembraMedia, who is going to introduce this fantastic research and help set the context for the insights we're going to hear over the course of the next hour. Janine?
Thank you so much, Arun. We really appreciate all your support and the support of everybody at GNI making this event and this project happen. I'm so excited to share our first version of a global Project Oasis, and we hope to expand this in the future to more countries and more regions. Today, this directory includes media from SembraMedia that we've actually been mapping since 2015, but this is the first time that we've translated all of those profiles into English and combined them in the Project Oasis world where you can now view them. And adding Brazil really helps us round out the story of what we're finding in Latin America. A lot of why we do this is to understand global insights that help people in every country that we work in. I want to take a moment and just thank the incredible research partners that made this possible. The team at SembraMedia has taken the lead, but we could not have done it without AJOR and Lion and so many allies in Europe. I also want to recognize that we've had some great promotional partners that have helped us to share this story with the world. And, you know, a lot of us do a big research project like this, and if we don't get it out to the audience, it doesn't have the impact we want. So we really appreciate those of you who are sharing this online and helping make sure this arrives in the hands of people who can really use it. This is your first glimpse at one of the infographics from the report. And this comes directly from the structured data that we collect. What you see in this graphic is how many media started each year in each of the 3 regions. So you see that in about 30 years ago, they started emerging. And we had this just amazing growth in the 2015s to the 2021. We've seen a little bit of a drop-off in the last couple of years. And some of that may be because we don't accept them into the directory till they're at least 6 months old, and because they're harder to find when they're new and really small. But we're seeing across all 3 regions that there may be a new reluctance of some of these entrepreneurs. And I think it's one of the reasons it's important to be thinking now about media incubation as well as acceleration to help make sure that we're replacing ones that may be disappearing and filling those news deserts. So here's a view of the directory. And I'm going to give you a really quick demo. Oops, if I can back up to that video. There we go. Okay. So if you come to the front page of the site, globalprojectoasis.org, you can explore the media directory. When you do that, you'll land on this home page where you can do a quick search with 6 of the filters. There are many more beyond that. So you could say, I want to know how many media are in Argentina in the directory. You'll see there are 119 here in this country where we are today. So if you're interested in learning more about media in Argentina, select the country, you'll find that. But you can also search by a name. So if you've heard that there's a site in Italy called Slow News and you want to know about them, type in their name and you'll find the profile. And in each of the profiles, when you open it up, there's a description as well as what we call structured data. So the interviewers ask these questions, enter it into the database, and when we do our analysis, we base it on this structured data. So you can see in each profile what kind of content they offer, how they make money, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit, where they started, who are the founders of the organization. You can also do more complex searches. So, for example, if you want to do a comparison like, how many of the media in the directory that are in Mexico also cover the environment and are nonprofits and got audience support? Those kinds of comparison studies can also be done. And if you go to the advanced page, you can search not only across countries, but also look at entire regions. Now note, if you choose a region and you try to choose a country, it's grayed out. The programmers didn't know what to do. If you choose Europe and you pick Argentina, it breaks the system. So if a filter can't be used simultaneously, it's grayed out. Or if the data isn't available, not all of the partners have all the data exactly the same, so some of those fields will be grayed out. But beyond that, you can start searching much more specifically here. So go back and clear the filters, and you'll see you can look not only at the 5 revenue categories, grants, advertising, audience support, consulting, and content services, you can actually look at all 30 of the different revenue categories we looked at. So if you want to see the media in Europe who accept programmatic advertising, or if you want to find media who do membership versus media who do subscriptions, those are the kinds of searches you can do in this more advanced view. Now, I could spend all day just playing with this directory, but we have a full show for you, and I want to make sure that we have time for other people to share some of the highlights of what we found when we spent the last few months just crunching this data and trying to understand what we could learn from them. I want to end by noting that this is not a comprehensive directory of every digital media site, blogger, and social personality we could find. This is a carefully curated collection of digital native media that meet our criteria for editorial independence, for creating their own original content, not just scraping and copying it, for providing some kind of public service that meets a need in their community, and for having the transparency to let us publish the names of the owners and founders of their organization. We make a few exceptions when the security of a media leader is at risk, but for the most part, you will find all of that information about all of these media so that you can see who's behind these. We also have a human touch. This criteria is not judged by me from the United States. This criteria is judged by somebody in Colombia about Colombia media and somebody in Argentina about Argentina media. And we've worked from the start to make sure that we had local journalists, researchers, academics who knew their media market, who could help us find the media that we should most shed a light on. Our goal with this project is to help these media leaders connect and learn from each other, and to help the academics and the researchers and the policymakers and the donors and others who share our passion for supporting these independent media leaders. With that, I want to pass the torch to Ana Paula, who has done a tremendous job of leading this project and is going to share some of the highlights of what we found when we crunched the data. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janine. Well, I imagine some of you may have some questions, and we are collecting questions in the chat of our streaming in YouTube. So please, if you want to ask any question, during the event, please scan this code, mute your cell phones, because we will hear that, and drop your questions there. Our team will be collecting them, and then we'll go and address. So, first of all, you can't imagine how happy I am to be here representing the work of over 100 people that work together to put this amazing directory in place. Today we're going to share some insights that are just a glimpse of all the information that we have in our directory and our report. So I really invite you to search the directory, explore the report, take some time, not now, after the event ends, of course. And well, I'm going to share some insights about what we've been doing, because as Janine mentioned, this includes 3 pre-existing directories and the mapping of a whole new country. So let's go through them. First, we have Latin America. Yes, a directory that we've been building for over 10 years with a team of ambassadors in SembraMedia, and where we have mapped over almost 900 media profiles. Then in Brazil, in the first expansion of Project Oasis, we have AJOR. Marcelo, who led that project, is here. And we mapped 164 media organizations. In the United States and Canada, thanks to the work of our partner, Lion Publishers, we have over 1,500 media profiles. And also, you will find over 20 media profiles that we have mapped because they basically cover the Hispanic market in Spanish. In Europe, this is a directory we built. So we have over 600 media profiles from 43 countries. And we will also see what's going on there. And just to start, again, what we mean by independent media organizations, digital native media organizations. We talk about media organizations that were born online, that publish primarily on the internet, and they meet our criteria, of course, of being editorial, independent, that they also observe the public service, and they uphold the values of transparency in their work. In the first part of this presentation, I will focus on some common trends that we've observed across these different regions. So let's get to it. First, when we started analyzing them, and when they were born, most of them were small, but some have grown into very impactful and relevant news organizations. Collectively, now, they are increasingly important in their communities. They provide vital news, and they are active actors in informing public debate. But this is not for free, of course. Getting more attention, being in the spotlight, means that they are being object to threats, menaces, and limitations to their work. 1 in 2 organizations in our media directory declare that they have been object to threats and attacks because of what they publish. And they take different shapes. 60% of our directory is for-profit, but we have almost 32% of non-profit organizations. And we have observed also a very interesting system of hybrid organizations that basically they operate in different, in non-profit and for-profit, especially to address different countries, to operate different countries. Yeah, revenues vary dramatically, yes. The situation when it comes to making money is very diverse. We have some that make over $1 million a year, but 10% of the directory make no revenue at all. And the average revenue in Europe, it will appear. Just bear with me. Here it comes. The average revenue in Europe is more than 4 times that of Latin America. It's very similar to those reported in the United States and Canada, but when we get to the distribution of that revenue, the difference is more pronounced. In Europe, 50% of the organizations report revenues of $150,000 per year, or more or less, depending, it's just the middle. In the US and Canada, 50% report revenues below 100K per year. And in Latin America, this is only for $20,000. And grants and advertising, yes, they are the primary source. Grants come in first when discussing the top source of revenue for nonprofits, especially. And advertising is the primary revenue source for for-profits. Here in this chart, you can see the breakdown of revenue sources. Nearly 70% of nonprofits report grants as their primary revenue source, and almost 60% of for-profits report advertising. And of course, these numbers, they can tell us that these founders, they are not here for the money. Most of these initiatives are led by mission-driven journalists. Many of them are professionals that left their positions or their work in very prestigious or traditional media. And they started these organizations because they wanted to do those stories that weren't able to do everywhere else, because they were too controversial, too dangerous, or that may affect the powerful interests. They transform them in what we call the reluctant entrepreneurs. They find themselves being entrepreneurs with everything that comes with that title, leading a business, giving the numbers, and seeking to build sustainable organizations. And consistently with previous research, many of these founders are women. More than half of these organizations were founded by teams that include at least one woman. And just to clarify this, in some cases that we don't compare, like more regions, because we don't have the comparable data, but here we have Latin America and Europe. And many start with what we call sweat equity. These are created by journalists that they wanted to do the job, and they often will to work as volunteers, especially during the first few years. And most of them are small teams. They have about 6 and 8 team members. But we saw that those organizations with teams of over 50 people, they make more revenues. They have 6 times more journalists than other type of members. But when they do diversify their teams and include sales team members, they earn significantly higher revenues. Digital media that hire sales and business development staff, they earn over 450% more revenue. Many are filling news deserts, as Janine mentioned, with a focus on covering human rights, gender issues, and local community news. And many have won awards for breaking news and investigative journalism. They are champions of fact-checking. They invest in investigative journalism. They cover the stories that others neglect. And many of them are also attracting younger audiences with innovative reporting. There are others that are fostering online discussions around their reporting to create audience engagement and generate revenue through audience support and sponsorships. These are some of the highlights of the 3 regions of what we've seen that they have in common. And now I invite Florencia Asa, who is the director of Accelerator Programs and Mentorship at SembraMedia, to share with us some of the differences we found in the Latin American landscape.
Wow. Hello, everyone. I'm Flor, and as the Accelerator Programs Director, it's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to share with you a couple of insights about the Latin America ecosystem. Before we begin, I would like to highlight that all the insights I'm going to share are related with the whole Latin America ecosystem, because later, Marcelo will be sharing specific insights from Brazil, thanks to our partner, AJOR. So, SembraMedia started to research this ecosystem in 2016, and we identified 1,056 media organizations from 21 countries, thanks to the amazing work that our ambassadors teams do in each country. The number of mapped media outlets changes yearly because journalism in Latin America, as you probably know, faces a delicate situation regarding its founding. From 2016 to May 2024, we identified that almost 700 media outlets stopped publishing, and nearly a third of those were removed in the last year. So let's talk about a couple of highlights. Knowing this, the first highlight we want to emphasize concerns something that SembraMedia has been researching for over 6 years, and that is that those media that have a diverse team in terms of skills earns more revenue. As we mentioned in previous reports, in Global Project Oasis we identified that media that have at least one person dedicated to sales generate 390% more revenue compared to those media without a person dedicated to sales. I know, it's a really powerful information. So, the second highlight has to do with something that really concerns us because it's the first time we saw this as a situation that involves almost the whole region. As you probably know, doing journalism in Latin America can be a really risky job. In many countries, journalists and their family are threats both physically and virtually by national and local government as well as private organizations. In recent years, we have been observing a harsher trend of violence against journalists and their families. Case in point, in the last 2 years, we have seen a dramatic increase in media leaders going into exile from Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, and most recently, Ecuador. These media outlets face an enormous challenges not only regarding their sustainability, but also about their security and all the challenges that come to working and living from a new country. We really believe that this information will be crucial to unify global efforts in providing help and support for those journalists so they can continue doing the valuable work they do. Going further, as you know, at SembraMedia, we work very close with media entrepreneurs in helping diversify their sources of revenue. In Global Project Oasis, we learned that the average annual revenue reported by digital media organizations was nearly $1,600. More than the half reports $20,000 or less per year, and 1 in 30 earns more than $1 million. Last but not least, as we have seen in previous reports, grants are one of the most important sources of revenue for independent digital media. Apart from these grants, a couple of media are diversifying their sources of revenue with advertising, content servicing, consultancy, membership, and donations. Consistent with what we have found in other reports and regions, 60% of for-profit media relies on advertising as their primary source of revenue, meanwhile 63% of non-profit organizations relies on grants. I know this was such a lot of information in very couple minutes, but I want to share with you that this is just a couple of insights. You can see more about this in the report and, of course, in our directory. So before finishing, I want to share with you a couple of media cases from this ecosystem so you can have an example of this vibrant ecosystem.
Hi, I'm Abraham Torres from Mexico, where I'm an ambassador of SembraMedia's community. Since 2015, Escenero Tlaxcala has been an info platform for diverse audiences. During the first 2 years as an internet radio station, it gave a voice to over 120 young people discussing all sorts of topics, such as movies, politics, and ecology. From 2020 to 2022, they did well, snagging 6 grants for research and incubation projects. Since 2019, they've been exploring different ways to gauge reader support. That year, after getting a lot of training at SembraMedia School, they created their content, marketing, and communication agency, Ingenious Lab. Through this agency, they work on local, national, and international projects, which now make up the 95% of their income. However, seeing some potential bottlenecks, they're about to launch El Círculo, a sustainability project that blends audience engagement with editorial content. Another case that I'd like to share with you is El Toque from Cuba. Since 2014, they have informed Cuban audiences on economic, socio-political, and legal issues. El Toque is an example of how, even in exile, media leaders are building new revenue sources. In 2022, 90% of El Toque's funding came from international grants. However, in 2023, they were able to reduce that figure to 70% by diversifying their model. For example, they launched an agency that provides design and audiovisual services, as well as finance and accounting services to clients. They also offer support to other organizations that give grants to smaller organizations in Cuba, helping to ensure that the resources can be sent to beneficiaries, and that those who receive these grants successfully complete financial and narrative reports for funders.
Hello, everybody. I am Sara Trejos, SembraMedia's ambassador in Colombia. Investing in technology is vital for independent media organizations, but it can put a strain on their limited resources. That's why I want to share with you the case of Cuestión Pública, an independent digital media outlet that focuses on investigated government, corporate bank transactions, and the trial of the public money in Colombia since 2018. They also cover other public interest topics such as health, labor, indigenous and Afro communities, rural land conflicts, and other issues related to Colombia's post-conflict period. Cuestión Pública promotes open data systems, digital culture, and technology to expose corruption and promote transparency. In their own words, they innovate to enhance counterpower investigative journalism. We know that media outlets with a larger full-time workforce tend to have higher revenue potential, but many smaller media outlets must rely on part-time teams and volunteers, especially when they cover smaller cities. That's the case for Telecintis, a digital media outlet in Bolivia. Founded in 2017, they cover local news with 20 part-time collaborations in 7 municipalities in the Sintins region or Chuquisaca, Bolivia. These local reporters share information obtained by phone with the editor, who guides their reporting and reviews their work. Founder Luis Alberto Guevara Lopez manages the entire operation from the city of Sucre, the capital, or Chuquisaca.
Thank you, Abraham and Sara, part of our ambassadors team. And now I invite Marcelo Fontoura, who is the coordinator of Project Oasis in Brazil, who led the amazing work they did with AJOR in mapping this very interesting ecosystem. So.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marcelo. I am super excited to be here sharing the insights, the main insights of the Global Oasis project in Brazil. So, first off, we interviewed 164 organizations. Our amazing team did this. I know a lot of them are following us right now in the live stream, so I'm glad to hear that. Some additional facts about the research. So we had a team of 9 people who were spread throughout the country in all the 5 regions of Brazil, most of the states. We had 2 special attentions to diversity. First, in diversity of the organizations, trying to get organizations that are not the well-known, not in the most important capitals, and also diversity among the researchers themselves. So paying attention to gender and race, right? So the research happened from October 23 to February 24. So I want to start off by talking about the size of the teams. The organizations are mainly formed by groups of up to 4 people, right? Although a few of them go to up to hundreds. So also this happened despite their big impact in the journalistic ecosystem. So, but as well, they also face a lot of threats outside of online harassment and other types of threats. They also face legal threats. This happens in forms of lawfare and lawsuits, and this is something that is very expensive for these organizations to counter, right? And this happens both in small and big operations. Now, talking about revenue sources. The primary revenue source, on contrary to other regions, the primary revenue source in Brazil is advertising, and is not only the most common revenue source, but also the most common primary revenue source for most organizations. But as we can see, grants are also very common and are the second most common primary source of revenue for organizations in Brazil. Additionally, we saw that there is a disparity in how grants are distributed. So when we map the grants to the 5 regions of Brazil, we can see that the Southeast region, which is the richest region, has most of the organizations that are supported by grants. And we can also see that the Center-West region, which is where the national capital, Brasilia, is located, doesn't have any organization that is supported by grants, right? And I want to finish here highlighting the case of Amazônia Real, which is a very good example of the Brazilian journalistic native digital ecosystem. Amazônia Real was founded by Kátia Brasil and is one of the main outlets of environmental journalism nowadays. It was founded in 2013. Kátia was working as a journalist for other outlets in Brazil, and she realized that most of her stories weren't being published. So she decided, well, I need to build an outlet to do that. And now she's a great reference. They have grown, they have dozens of people working for them, and they have a huge impact in the journalistic ecosystem. So that's it. Thank you very much, and I will go back to Flor.
Hello again to everyone. Thank you, Marcelo, for sharing this powerful insight from Brazil. As we said in the beginning, the US and Canada Directory identified 1,553 media organizations from these 2 countries thanks to information that Lion Publisher collected from their communities in the US and Canada. If you don't know, Lion Publisher is a non-profit organization that has been providing training and support for the local news industry in the US and Canada for more than 10 years. The first highlight you might notice is that 2/3 of media outlets say they mostly use their savings or their personal funds to launch. This is consistent with what I've seen in other regions, demonstrating how hard it is for media entrepreneurs to qualify for loans or access to other type of startup capital. The second highlight is related to revenue. The US and Canada Directory showed that 60% of them heavily relies on only one single source of revenue, which is local advertising. Also, outlets in this study shows that the ones who had multiple sources of revenue were more likely to be profitable. When we look at the amount of revenue they earn in the US and Canada, the average annual revenue is about $600,000. More than 50% brings $100,000 or less per year, and 1 in 10 earns more than $1 million. The last highlight refers to News Desert. 1 in 7 media founders started a local media organization to address a local news desert, reflecting their mission-driven focus. Digital native media are also filling gaps in Spanish-language news and fighting misinformation in the US through partnerships and networks such as FactChequeado. To conclude, I want to thank Lion Publishers and all their team for being part of Global Project Oasis, and I want to share with you a couple of media cases from this industry. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Natalie Van Hooser, the SembraMedia Ambassador for the United States. I'm here to highlight 3 case studies from the US and Canada that are included in the Project Oasis database created by Lion Publishers. Outlier Media in Detroit, Michigan in the United States illustrates the trend we've seen toward the increase in local digital news that are filling news deserts. Founded in 2016, Outlier is a nonprofit news organization that received the Lion Publishers Business of the Year Award in 2023. It started as an SMS texting service designed to reach low-income residents with the most simple technology. In addition to receiving important local news updates, community members of Detroit can send messages back to automatically receive housing and other critical information, as well as text directly with Outlier reporters. Outlier also runs the Detroit Documenters program, where they train and pay Detroit residents to attend local public meetings and monitor elected officials, in collaboration with local journalists. In Canada, the Green Line is a hyperlocal news outlet founded in 2021 that first soft launched on Instagram and TikTok, with the goal of reaching youth audiences and other underserved communities of Toronto. Today, the organization has a team of 34 staff members and freelancers and manages its own website, as well as sharing information through social media. A defining product of the organization is Action Journey, an innovative effort to encourage Toronto's community members to create positive social change. The Green Line breaks down a series of problems that the community is facing, reports on local solutions, and hosts community events to gather resident input. They also crowdsource additional ideas to encourage people to stay more involved. In 2023, the Green Line won Lion Publishers' Product of the Year award. Project Oasis also maps Spanish-language media in the U.S., such as Planeta Venus in Wichita, Kansas. Founded in 2015 as a radio show, Planeta Venus now features a website, print publication, and digital newsletter that serves Spanish speakers in the Wichita region of Kansas. They are also a great example of how digital media benefit when they develop partnerships. Planeta Venus was one of the founding members of the Latino Local News Collaborative, a group of media organizations that are working together to maximize their limited resources as they cover electoral participation among Latino communities during this important election year in the U.S. As a 2024 Lion Publishers Community Ambassador, Planeta Venus founder Claudia Amaro is also facilitating community building among Lion member newsrooms serving Spanish-speaking audiences. In 2023, Planeta Venus was a finalist for the Lion Publishers New Business of the Year award. Thank you.
And thank you, Natalie, another spectacular part of the team of ambassadors in SembraMedia. And finally, yes, this is the final part of the highlights presentation. We got to Europe. In 2022, SembraMedia started mapping Europe. We hired 3 regional managers and a team of over 40 researchers that map over 40 countries as well. We got to create profiles for 633 media. And what we have seen now, when we updated this information and we got to talk again with these media leaders, is that more journalists are also under threat in Europe due to the war in Ukraine, but there are other conflicts going on. Many of the media leaders in our directory that come from Belarus, they are also operating from exile. And we have seen an increase in journalists going also into exile from Azerbaijan and other Central and Eastern European countries. This is relevant because these initiatives are particularly committed to covering underrepresented communities. They also use techniques that allow them to provide context and depth to key issues in their societies. That is very important, as Arun has mentioned. And they prioritize innovative approaches that involve their audiences. For example, explanatory journalism was the most mentioned among all these techniques. By providing context and analysis, they help readers better understand what's going on in their communities. And they also use solutions journalism, for example, to understand how people are solving their real-life problems. And similar to other regions in Europe, grants was a primary revenue. Sorry, here. Similar to other regions, grants was the primary revenue source reported, and advertising comes second by a significant difference, if you see, closely followed by audience support. Again, for-profit media was reporting advertising as their primary source. And of course, we also make the observation that grants is likely influenced because we are focusing on public service media, of course. And these organizations also prioritize hiring people in content. But when they do invest in sales teams, this investment pays off. And this is something we've seen across all regions. In Europe, the average annual revenue for media that has at least one sales team is almost 6 times that of those who don't hire employees of this type. And now, I just want to go to our 3 regional managers they have done an amazing work over the past year and a half, and who will share some examples of this work in Europe.
Thank you for this opportunity. It's really exciting to launch Global Project Oasis. For those who don't know me, I'm Sanne Breimer. I'm the research manager for Northern Europe, and I'm based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And I'm going to present 2 cases from my part of the world. First one is Greater Govanhill in Glasgow, Scotland, named after the same neighborhood, or the neighborhood with the same name. Journalist and founder Rhiannon Davies moved to this neighborhood in 2018, and she saw the negative stereotyping in media about this area. She, at the same time, experienced Greater Govanhill as a place where a lot of people from different backgrounds live together with a wealth of community projects, and she wanted to show that side of Greater Govanhill. And so she founded the media during the pandemic. It exists now of a core team of 10 people and around 30 volunteer contributors. So Greater Govanhill really works closely to the community. So their bi-monthly magazine is also created through a communal effort. People can come and pitch story ideas. They discuss the magazine content together, and that's how it's created. So the mission of Greater Govanhill really is to make journalism accessible for a local community. And they use collaborative journalism, investigative journalism, but also essays, opinion pieces, etc. And they don't just collaborate with their own community, they also collaborate outside of their community. For example, with investigative outlet The Ferret, with whom they founded the Community Newsroom, which is a physical space that people can visit. And then there's the Scottish Beacon, a collaborative network of 24 independent media in Scotland, and Greater Govanhill is part of that too. So it's really a great example of hyper-local media, of which we have much more in our directory, and how community journalism can be successful. The second example is general news outlet Mediapart from Paris in France. Mediapart is one of the first independent digital native media in France, and it's founded in 2008 by former Le Monde journalists, 6 of them. It's completely funded by subscribers, and their motto says, "Only our reader can buy us." They have over 220,000 subscribers at the moment and 130 full-time employees. Mediapart is known for consistently setting the news agenda in France with multiple impactful investigations throughout the years. There is a section especially for subscribers where they can contribute themselves with text, photos, images, videos, etc. It's called Le Club. Mediapart's ambition is phrased as the duty to investigate, the courage to reveal. And its mission really is to give you as a citizen the tools and the information to review the decisions made in your name. So to really become part of the democratic process. The media also publishes its figures and accounts yearly, which gives a very transparent view of this independent digital media. And it is, with its business model, a great example of other of this type of media in our directory. Thank you.
I'm glad you're all here for this big launch. My name is Elena Ledda. I'm Project Oasis Research Manager for Southern Europe, and I'm based in Barcelona, Spain. I want to share with you 2 other cases that I think we can find inspiring. The first one is Solomon from Greece. It was launched in 2016 to exclusively cover migration, refugee-related issues during the peak of the Mediterranean refugee crisis. Its editor-in-chief, Stavros Malichoudis, says that they wanted to ask the question how it was possible to integrate the refugees arriving then, when Greece did not even take care of the migrants who had arrived before. They also aimed at promoting collaboration between journalists and migrant refugee communities. Among others, one of their founders was Nasruddin Nizami, an Afghan who currently works for the Greek Council for Refugees as a board member. The team now includes 6 staffers and 1 freelancer. Everyone does journalistic work, but one of them mainly does admin and operation, and one also management work. They also count on an illustrator. Most recently, Solomon started covering topics like the environment, corruption, and accountability through the lens of investigative journalism, and doing cross-border collaborative projects for which they won awards like the Daphne Caruana Galizia Prize, which they were awarded in 2023 as part of a consortium for investigating the Adriana shipwreck, which left over 600 migrants dead off pilots in Greece. Another aspect for which Solomon is becoming an international reference is journalism mental health. In 2022, they published a journalism and mental health guide, and they employ a therapist in order to protect the team's mental health while investigating sensitive topics. The second case is from Portugal. In 2016, journalists Ricardo Esteves Ribeiro and Maria Lemedo, together with other 3 colleagues, launched Fumaça, an investigative journalism podcast that mainly publishes audio and narrative works. They follow the model of some North American podcasts and independent media outlets they regularly listen to, such as Democracy Now!, because they loved it and couldn't understand why there was something like that in Portugal. The team includes 9 people, 2 of them part-time, who do web development and admin work. The Fumaça's team believes that journalism is a method and not an identity. So every team member is included in their multi-groups editing process. And at the same time, everyone also does other things besides journalism. 2 are also in charge of fundraising, to do marketing and community management, and so on. They also believe in journalism as a public good. Therefore, all of their content is available for free and republishable. For them, it is important to guarantee a dignified life and correct imbalances and inequalities in our society. They consider themselves a non-hierarchical newsroom who has no editor-in-chief, no director, and where all the decisions are made through consensus, which explains the fact that they decide together what their salaries will be and update this info every year. Everyone has a contract and earns the same, and they don't accept internships nor fake freelancers, and have ended up paying higher salaries even than traditional media, which is especially surprising in a country like Portugal, where journalistic salaries are so low that they often do not reach the minimum wage. And they do so because they believe that it doesn't make sense to investigate precariousness and then not practice what they preach.
Hello, Buenos Aires. Hello, world. I'm Lela Vujenic, reporting to you in 40 Celsius degrees from coastal Croatia. I work as regional research manager for Central and Eastern Europe. Some of the countries in my region are known as being the most dangerous countries for journalists in Europe, while in others, media outlets operate in so-called small languages and small cultures, often without no access to any form of public subsidy support. Despite these challenges, they succeeded to put forward innovative business and editorial strategies and to serve their audiences in the face of political turmoil. First case study that I want to share with you is SembraMedia from Tbilisi in Georgia. They started in 2017, and back then they had 2 main things in mind. They wanted to bring well-researched, a bit longer news from North and South Caucasus in English to the world. Today they have a newsroom with 12 employees and around 25 freelance contributors. They produce English language website, newsletters, and podcasts. Recently, they launched a membership program with exclusive access for their members to daily Caucasus Brief newsletter. SembraMedia also cooperates with 6 other media outlets from the region and they translate part of the OC Media content in their own languages. During Nagorno-Karabakh War, OC Media ran a section Voices for Peace, where they gave platform to those who are pro-peace but marginalized. OC Media stays committed to social justice and peace because this is part of their values and their mission. Moving now to Warsaw, Poland, to our second case study. Oko Press was founded in 2016 in challenging political conditions in Poland. They were founded with the aim to serve as civic tool of power control. They cover human rights, democracy, rule of law. They conduct investigations, check facts, and debunk myths and propaganda. They also run a successful long-form political show on YouTube, and they are particularly strong on social media. Their transgenerational newsroom has around 40 regular employees and more than 50 freelance contributors. Most importantly, Oko Press has engaged community that supports its newsroom with individual donations that cover around 70% of their operational costs. All content that Oko Press publishes is available free without paywall. Oko Press newsroom has won numerous journalist awards while being integral part of Polish civil society, covering protest and civic mobilizations and giving platform to minorities and the excluded ones. Thank you for your attention and greetings from the Balkans.
Thank you, Lale, Leila, Sane, and Elena. They are an amazing team, and I've enjoyed working with them and their passion. This is great. And, well, again, I just want to give credit to the over 100 people that work together in this project. We plan to expand our research, as Janine has mentioned, and while we prepare ourselves to continue mapping and learning about independent media in new countries, I invite everyone again to explore our directory, read the report, and learn more about these very important news leaders. You can scan here and go directly to the URL. And now, next comes a panel discussion with some very interesting people. And I really want to invite you all to scan this code and share your questions in the chat. We are compiling them, and we would like you to ask very interesting questions. I know you may have some. And I would like to invite Miguel Or, coordinator of Project Oasis Europe, and also former coordinator of ambassadors at SembraMedia, to the stage to lead our panel. And again, please ask your questions here.
Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today and introduce the panel for this last part of the session. My name is Miguel Or Paredes, and I'm the Project Oasis Europe team coordinator. And I'm delighted to invite our wonderful speakers this morning to sit and join us in this conversation where we will delve further into some of the amazing insights that we have gathered from this report. First of all, I would like to ask Arun Venkataraman to join and take the seat over there. Please, Janine, SembraMedia's director. Marcelo Fontoura, who was the coordinator for Project Oasis in Brazil and our partner AJOR. And our special guest, Olivia Sor from Chequeado, an amazing organization from Argentina. Please. All right, so how are you feeling after that lunch? I hope you are all excited as I am. First of all, I would like to begin with a general question regarding what surprised you and what confirmed what you've already seen in the past. Why don't we start with you, Oli?
Sure. So thank you very much for this invitation and for having me here. It's been incredible to see everything you've just presented, the amount of work of data and things. I think I need to go slowly through that report and through all the information to get all those insights that I think will be incredibly helpful to better understand the information ecosystem. And about what I found more surprising, I'm not sure it was surprising, but it was very worrying to see the amount of journalists that say they have been harassed a lot of the times online, but sometimes also in the physical world. I think the number was about 50%. I know we've been seeing, or we've been more aware of the amount of harassment around, but I was at least not aware that half the journalists are being harassed this way. And I'm not sure we're taking this seriously enough to prepare journalists, to help them, to accompany them, to find ways to mitigate the impact that this might have in their work. I mean, we're already asking them to work many times in very precarious situations, sometimes with low wages, doing a lot of multitasking with lots of multimedia and writing and investigating and doing everything at the same time on social media. And on top of that, we're asking them to be subject to this kind of harassment online that sometimes can go from from insults to publishing personal information and to other things. The data in Brazil was even more worrying. So I think that's something that I look in the report and worry very much about what we can do in the future. We probably can't put those numbers down, but how do we support these journalists in their work so that this does not become another way of another obstacle for the work that they're doing, and that they don't have to prioritize family or their work in their daily life?
That's a very relevant question to ask ourselves. Marcelo, would you like to go next?
Yes. So at the same point that Olivia brought about threats, and I mentioned before the legal threats, I was expecting before that only the large organizations would have been facing legal threats and not the smaller ones. And that was a surprise. It was very well spread. Every kind of organization was facing legal threats. And that's not necessarily a lawsuit, just the threat of a lawsuit. It's enough for you to drop your operations, drop whatever you're doing. So that's one thing. The other thing, which is a good thing that actually surprised me, was that we asked how was the performance of these outlets in the previous fiscal year. And well over half of them said that they had increased up to 20%. And we also asked them what was their perspective towards their next fiscal year, so that's now. And over half of them said they were expecting to increase their revenue by up until 20%. And that's a lot. So even though with several pressures, maybe journalists in Brazil were more optimistic, I don't know. But they seem to be very optimistic toward the scenario. And that's a surprise, a good surprise that I saw.
Arun, why don't you follow up on that?
Yeah, I think similar to Ollie and Marcelo, I think we all know that there is intimidation across the ecosystem for journalists and news organizations, and that's only grown in a context where more and more markets are subject to political capture. I think seeing that number, that it's more than 50% of the news organizations in a directory of more than 3,000 organizations that have had a journalist that has been subjected to online harassment or violence or physical violence is shocking. And I think it's a very difficult environment for high-quality editorial journalism to take place in. And I think there's a lot of, takeaways for the entire ecosystem to think through on perhaps what collaborative resources around safety, security, and legal support could look like. I think the other statistic that doesn't surprise me, because I've seen it in some of the prior reports, is just the extent to which it matters having an employee that's focused on making money, on sales, on diversification of revenue. And I think having someone from the very beginning who's constantly thinking about the audience funnel, how do you optimize the audience funnel, how do you use that to drive revenue, ends up really helping build the capacity of these organizations over time. And to see that it's about 4 to 6 times across all 3 regions, it's a very stark difference. And I think from an ecosystem perspective, there's a lot more we can do to take these very mission-centered journalists who do really fantastic work and are driven by the mission, and maybe support them with business training, like the work that SembraMedia does in the region here, to really help them think about how to build more sustainable news organizations going forward.
Thank you. That's a great point. I think, yes, we have seen this over and over. Diversifying skills helps diversify revenue, helps build sustainability. But I also want to acknowledge, even with a salesperson, it's hard. Even with grants, it's rarely enough. And grants are not a long-term reliable solution. It's part of why we encourage them as early as possible to start looking for other sources of revenue for both their independence but also their resilience. When we first did a report in 2017 with support from Luminate Group, we published Inflection Point, and it was wildly optimistic. I was so excited to see the growth, the development, what they were accomplishing, and I'm still wildly optimistic about the potential. But this year, as we reviewed the directory and went through and renovated, we saw more of them had closed than in any prior year, and that really hit me hard. And I have to admit, entrepreneurs, they don't all succeed. Statistics show, 20 to 50% of them fail, depending on how many years you study them. In the first several years that we were working mapping media in Latin America, we actually saw a very low failure rate. It was about 20%, which made me worry a little, because these entrepreneurs are so dedicated. They'll keep going even when they don't make money. Most entrepreneurs, if they're not being successful, stop and close. These folks keep going. And that's really inspired me, and I think it's really inspired a lot of the donors and organizations like the International Fund for Independent Public Media. Vani, thank you for joining us today. There's some big efforts to raise money to help these organizations, and I think it's vital that we give them that grant support they need to get started as they build diversified revenue. And I know that IFPIM shares that mission-driven focus, but also trying to make them more independent. So there's so much more I could say. But I know we have more questions, Miguel.
Yes, thanks, Janine, for that. And let's pick on some of this conversation that we have had so far. And Arun, I would like to ask you first, what are the drivers of sustainability that you have seen in the media organizations featured in this report and worldwide in your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the research efforts we support is the News Sustainability Project, and that looks at both legacy news organizations, so news organizations that have a print and digital business, and then a number of, about half of that report focuses on digital native news organizations, like the ones we identify here in Project Oasis. I think in that report there are a couple of things that all news organizations can generally do that is going to improve the likelihood of success. We know that there's a very strong correlation between logged-in rate, so having a high percentage of your readers having their emails, having them logged into your website, and sustainability readiness, profitability long-term. And it's because when you have them logged in, you're able to understand their activity on the website a little bit more. You can send them emails. In some contexts that aren't as email-friendly, they use phone numbers and they use text messages to drive readers back to the website. And it can make a big difference to both understand more deeply what these readers want and how they're using your website, but also to move them along the funnel to help them potentially contribute if you have a memberships model, or become a subscriber if you have a subscriptions model. We've also seen diversification of revenue sources, so is very important. We saw that in the Project Oasis report. We've also seen that in other research efforts, typically somewhere between 3 and 5 revenue sources. But the importance of doing that gradually and over time, really focusing on one revenue source the first year, and then as you develop your audience, you build loyalty, that's going to create opportunities for additional sources of revenue. And then I think the importance, and this is why the business focus from the very get-go is so important. When we look at the New Sustainability Project, publishers that have really tightened their operational rigor in terms of how they run the business, much more likely to succeed over the long run, in large part because they're creating capacity to experiment. And I think that's extremely important when consumer behaviors and preferences are changing so drastically, when the market is changing so drastically. It's really important for news organizations to run tight fiscal ships, to create opportunities, to experiment, and really think about what the value proposition down the road can look like. Now, all of this is only possible if you figure out the first thing, which is providing high-quality news information that your community values, so product market fit. And it's why I think we have to pay attention to what consumers are telling us through consumer studies like the Reuters Digital News Report and elsewhere, to really recognize that consumers their expectations from news is also shifting. And in a noisy information ecosystem, to become essential to your readers, to become vital to your readers, to become a place that your readers return to regularly, this is a higher bar. But I also think it presents an opportunity. We've seen that in this noisy information ecosystem, consumers, they want explanatory information. They want information that helps distill the signal from the noise, that gives them a way forward in how they respond to this increasingly complicated world that they're a part of. And I think explanatory information, solutions-oriented information, information that consumers can use to make sense of the world around them and how to navigate through it, I think will become increasingly important, increasingly relevant. And I think one of the things that's really struck me with the case studies we saw earlier and that you'll find in the report is a number of these publications are focused on just that, on really taking a step back and recognizing, okay, you're constantly sifting through thousands and thousands of articles, pieces of information, and you can feel lost in all of that noise. Here's a place where you can come to get above that noise and maybe even have some sense of how you approach decisions in your life and your community going forward.
Thanks, Arun. Very important to highlight the values of these media organizations, and that's another thing that I wanted to discuss further with you. And Janine, this is a question for you. And one of the recurring themes across the media organizations featured in this report seems to be trust. What is the role that you see of these particular value within the business models of these organizations?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk around the world of journalism about trust and the loss of trust from some audiences and the number of people who are just saying, I don't really want to see bad news anymore, right? So we have to recognize that some of the traffic loss comes from that, although there are many factors. But how do we build back trust? Well, one of the things that we've seen in many other studies is that the more local the news source, the more likely you are to trust them. So this global movement of more and more local news organization really gives me hope. And if you think about your own personal impact in the world, whatever presidential election you may have encountered this year or about to encounter, these are highly polemic events. And we get tons of news about these big national stories. But the impact you can have voting for a local city council member or a school board member is far more significant in the US and many other countries than at the presidential level. And so these local news organizations that first try to hold local politicians to account, but also try to help get citizens more involved at that level, I think are also contributing to restoring trust in news. And then I'll also do a shout out to the ones that, I think it was Flora that mentioned, the number that are starting to do conversations with their audience. There's one in Colombia that's gotten a lot of attention that we mention in the report called Mutante, like mutant. And they really are trying to show how different they are from other news. They will report often on taboo and very complicated polemic issues like abuse against young women or girls. And they will do reporting on it. They'll look at, they'll investigate it deeply. And then they will facilitate an online conversation for 2 weeks, a public debate around whichever topic it is that they're covering at this time. And they're not only getting people into a conversation much more engaged in news than most, they're actually getting sponsors to pay for those and not letting the sponsors control the conversation. So they're keeping their kind of editorial line and their financial line separate, and that seems to really be building trust with their audience. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Janine. I would like to remind the audience that you can also submit your questions. The production team is also collecting them online, so please give it a go. And we still have some space to chat about this. And now, speaking about revenue, income, I would like to ask you, Marcelo, what are the ways organizations can diversify their income source? What have you observed in the way that they can ensure independence, just like Janine was sharing before?
That's a really good question, something of a looming issue, right? Something we have been discussing for a while. I think there are two issues that you can pay attention to here. One is more of a background and one more specific. In terms of background, something connected to what Aaron said is to have a strong connection to your audience. When you have a strong connection to your audience knows who you are and knows how you do stuff in terms of transparency and sees the value and feels represented, actually feels represented by what you do. This is easier to engage them and earn money in other ways, either via an event or maybe courses. And this is not something that happens on a single day, right? It's something that takes a long time. We have seen several outlets globally that have they have closed down or they have shrinked, not because necessarily they were bad outlets, but because they grew too fast, right? So you have to have a good relationship with your audience in order to grow sustainably. So that's one thing. More specifically, I would say having very focused tests. Right? So instead of just building to do something really big that you have been expecting for years, do a small test of some kind of campaign, some kind of a course or event. They're just testing the waters, and then you can build on top of that if that makes sense. So I think those are some two ideas that can help outlets to diversify their revenue and be more sustainable.
Thank you, Marcelo. And perhaps one of the persons who was more qualified to speak about this is Olivia, who is part of the Chequeado team, which is an organization that has distinguished itself as one of the leaders in fact-checking. And I would like to ask you if you believe that it's necessary to differentiate yourself from other organizations in the way that you produce content, and what's your take on that?
Yeah, sure. So the fact that we do fact-checking makes it kind of easier for us to differentiate ourselves from others because it's a very specific format and people recognize that. So like when they see an image with the falso or the fake or true on it, they know that if it's here, it's probably us doing it. So it's very easy to kind of be identified for the work that we're doing. But we didn't start doing fact-checking because of that. We started because we had a very clear objective, which was to provide data and information to citizens in an easy and impactful way. And we found that fact-checking was the right format for that kind of work that we wanted to do at that moment. And I think the fact that we've had this very clear north and very clear objective of what we want to do and what we want to give to our community. So like we're not giving them opinion, we're not giving them a lot of other things that journalism does very well, but that's not our part, that's not our value, that's not what we're going to provide, helps us a lot to then be able to adapt. And so we know that then we have to find different ways to communicate, but we always have this kind of value proposition very in line with what Arun was saying before, in which we know what it is that we're proposing. And I think a lot of media outlets have incredible journalists that want to do really good journalism and sometimes are doing really good journalism, but they don't have a specific focus, either because they don't have a specific format or an angle that they're covering or a geographical location or whatever it is that can distinguish what they're doing from others. And in these days when a lot of the information has become nearly a commodity, I think it's even more important to have something very specific that you're giving, and that will help you also not get lost in a lot of the fads that go around. So like not go to long video and then short video and long pieces, then short pieces, and then whatever the algorithm tells you I have to do next. And that if you don't build like a solid base and a solid value proposition and something that can identify you, might get you lost in the middle of the process and end up with very good journalists doing incredible journalism, but with no specific focus and no kind of north of what it is that you're providing and what it is that you're offering people. And that will make it much harder to have a connection with your audience and to build up trust and all the rest. So I do think it's incredibly important for media that exists, but also for new media, to have this very clear idea of what it is they are proposing and why it's different from others.
Let me just jump in here 1 second and recognize that Chequeado is also a really great example of the generosity of these entrepreneurs. Chequeado started more than 10 years ago. It was the first fact-checking site in Latin America, but they went on to help other countries, and there is now a fact-checking site in almost every Latin American country, largely because of the model and the generosity of your team and helping them get there. And you're not the only ones that do that. We've seen a lot of these journalists partner, collaborate, help each other start. There's a media site in Honduras called Contra Corriente that was born in one of our workshops years ago, and we started with a lot of support from somebody in Chile Chile and somebody in Argentina that flew to Honduras to help them get that started. The generosity and the mutual support is really what I think gives me the greatest hope for them overcoming these obstacles. So I just wanted to make sure you got credit for that at Chequeado.
Thank you very much. And let me just add that we do have a very collaborative spirit behind us, and our philosophy is that. But it's also good for our work. It's not only kind of altruism, it's also because it makes a lot of sense to collaborate, because you can do much greater things if you do it that way.
I'm going to segue into some of the questions that have the SembraMedia team has collected online. And this is a question specifically for Marcelo, following up on what Oli said before. And it says, this is from Portal o Correio. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Marcelo, what is your opinion on the challenges facing independent local digital media in Brazil in the face of so many news deserts in a country with continental dimensions? Could you please keep it as short as you can?
Okay, not too many paragraphs. Yes, exactly. Yes, there are several threats, mainly because those independent media operators, they have difficult to be known, right? First, they have to be known in that community, and that is a challenge in itself. And they have the difficulty of being more vulnerable to legal threats, to other kinds of threats, right? But they do have one possibility of, like one advantage, is that Brazilians tend to trust more their local newspaper, and this comes from the Reuters Institute as well. In the list of what is the outlet that you most trust, there is one category that is your local newspaper, and that local or regional newspaper, and that is like the third option. So Brazilians do have the posture of tending to trust more their local news outlets. So that's something that we need to enjoy this opportunity in order to build that trust. So yeah, it is difficult, but there is a way.
Arun, one last question for you before we give another set of answers to the audience and the people who are joining us here today. Let's see it from the other side. What should the ecosystem focus on to support the needs of this growing sector?
Yeah, I think you hear about Oli's experience with Chequeado, and we know the concerns so many are having with distinguishing high quality from low quality information, and organizations like Chequeado are responding to that moment. And I think one of the things that's very hopeful about the Project Oasis directory and databases, there's so many journalists and media organizations that are responding to the moment. What we also see is that there are profound conditions that they're having to navigate, and I think we've heard a few of them today. I would say that for the ecosystem, thinking through how we keep journalists safe is probably number one, and as important as the revenue and monetary challenges, which we oftentimes like to think about, and is going to become more and more important as more and more markets face media capture. Just ensuring that editorial journalists can continue to stay independent, can continue to pursue the truth. And I think there are opportunities for the broader ecosystem, stakeholders across news, tech, civil society to really galvanize around that problem. One of the sections I really love in the Project Oasis report is the work on publishers-in-exile. And there's a lot of really great recommendations, in particular, on how the broader global ecosystem can support the work of publishers-in-exile specifically. I think there is also an opportunity for investing in more shared tech and admin services, particularly in the global south. Oftentimes tech solutions that are provided, and you're right, everywhere, including for hyper-local, local news organizations in particular in the global north, but particularly in the global south, there's a lot of tech solutions that might be available, but at a price point that's not, outside the opportunity they're able to support. And so I think there is work around creating tech solutions that are more accessible for news organizations in the global south. And then I think finally, just what we can do to continue to encourage the ecosystem to really, really focus on communities. and thinking about ways in which they can. I think there's a famous thesis from an American sociologist named Robert Putnam, and he talks about bowling alone and how increasingly individuals in a digital world, they're bowling alone. They're living very atomized lives. I think the real opportunity for news organizations is actually to connect people together. It's one of the reasons why local news organizations also do well with trust, with fighting against polarization. And I think as an ecosystem, we should think about what are tools, techniques we can make available at scale that allow news organizations to be more connected to the communities that they serve, and to help connect those individuals with each other. That feels like a very unique role that news organizations can play, and I think that's a takeaway maybe for folks who are thinking about this at the ecosystem level to think about how they can help enable.
Thank you. And finally, I would like to ask you for one advice, only one advice for anyone that you might stumble upon on an elevator, okay? So let's imagine that you only have 10 seconds, 20 seconds to speak to them, and what would you say? Like, what's the general advice that you would give to them? Let's start with you, Oli. 20 seconds, you have that.
I would say, as I said, have a very clear idea of what it is that you're proposing and have a diverse team in every way you can, especially, and as you were saying before, have someone for the sales team. It's incredible that these reports have been coming, and it's still incredibly hard to convince leaders and founders to hire people in their sales teams.
Thank you.
I would say two things. One, know your audience very well. And the other is do things your own way. And I'm not saying to not follow other studies and not follow what we're saying. Is like look for solutions that work for your audience. If everyone is talking about AI and using AI, you don't need to use AI if it's not necessary for your audience, for what you are doing. So think about your context.
I'm an optimist, and I love inspiring people to do these things, but I always also have to recognize that it's not easy. And I think, especially for funders as well as founders, both the people who start these and some of the people who support them need to realize that sustainability takes time. Even businesses that start with the goal of making money often take years before they turn a profit. And most of these aren't even thinking about profit. So to expect them in a one-year grant to go from zero to sustainable, or in a 3-week seminar to actually learn what they need to diversify revenue, I want to make sure we have a minimum. When we do media acceleration, we won't do it unless we have at least 6 months. And even that is really short. In the US, AJP, I believe, gives grants with acceleration for 2 years at a time. And that maybe starts to be the runway we need. So give them time, give them patience, and do everything we can to support them as they struggle to build sustainability.
Your 20 seconds.
I think all the great ideas have already been taken. So I would just reinforce the importance of thinking about sustainability from the very beginning, because it is important that you're able to continue to serve the mission, your community, and to do that over the long run. And I think it's why resources like the one SembraMedia has developed. It's why the approach that Chequiada has taken is just so important, because it enables these organizations to continue to serve these vital needs over the long run.
Thanks, everyone. And I would like to request a big round of applause to the media featured in this amazing report and the production team behind this wonderful work. And, of course, to our amazing panelists this morning. Thanks
and
again.
I have to do a shout out to everyone at SembraMedia who worked so hard this month. Muchas gracias todos por todos que han hecho, and all of the people who contributed to this. And yes, the media leaders who gave us their time in the first place just to do these interviews. Thank you all for being with us.
Thanks. And now I will leave the floor to Ana Paula once again to wrap up this wonderful event. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Now you have a lot of time to go through the report. It's almost 100 pages and packed with data, so take some time and also read the stories of these news organizations. They are also amazing. And now we invite you all, those who are here, those who are following us to the streaming, because now we have a cocktail to celebrate a little bit all this amazing work that has been done by all our teams. And thank you again for joining us.